Hi folks, it's Professor Michael Tafel. I'm right outside the walls of Florence, Italy here, and you want to know why the Florentine Republic failed? Essentially in the year 1530, there was tens of thousands of troops here outside the walls waiting to attack the city and essentially force the Republic into submission. But just think about that. I mean, as I'm sitting here, it's a beautiful summer day. I'm watching folks walking up this hill towards the Piazza Michelangelo for the beautiful views of Florence. There's a place I can get a spritz right there. There's two cool restaurants, a gelato shop over here. It's just so hard to imagine tens of thousands of troops right outside these walls, commanded by Charles V, who was the Holy Roman Emperor and the King of Spain, in conjunction with Clement VII, the Medici Pope, who wanted to take back his city for the Medici. Now, these troops were out here for 10 months. The people inside these walls were terrified. They had heard what had happened to Rome just 3 years earlier in 1527, and they assumed the same thing was going to happen to them. Now, the city leaders were constantly negotiating, trying to get a good settlement. How can we save face and not, have to fight these guys? Now, there's an extraordinary historian, long deceased, but his name is Eric Cochrane. And Eric Cochrane wrote many books, but this book here is called Florence in the Forgotten Centuries. It's an excellent account, 1527 to 1800. It's an excellent account of Florence in the post-Republic years. Now, he begins his work with a bunch of reasons for why the Florentine Republic failed and a detailed account of this siege, which I couldn't put in better words myself, so I'm going to read it to you. So sit back and relax and read along with me. August 10th, 1530, Palazzo Vecchio, Florence. It was almost midnight by the time the 4 delegates finally returned from the headquarters of the Imperial Army outside of Porta San Miniato. They had been there since mid-morning, desperately bargaining with Baccio Valori, the personal representative of Pope Clement VII, and with Ferrante Gonzaga, the commander-in-chief of the forces of Emperor Charles V. They had succeeded in obtaining only a few face-saving concessions: the restoration of all territories formerly under Florentine rule, a general amnesty for all citizens of all parties, the right of any citizen to emigrate if he so desired, and a promise to respect the liberty of the city in any eventual reorganization of the government. But the delegates had had little to bargain with. After 10 months of simply camping outside the walls, the Imperial Army may have been tired, bored, and as always underpaid, but it was still intact. And even the slightest intransigence could easily have provoked it into doing to Florence what it had done to Rome 3 years before: tear it to pieces. The usual band of young hotheads in the city may still have been ready to follow the example of the ancient Saguanites who destroyed themselves rather than to submit to the Romans, but the bulk of the citizen militia had already been disbanded. The commander of the Florentine mercenaries had submitted his resignation, and political prisoners had been released. And the mobs of half-starved plebeians were wandering through the streets shouting "Palle, Palle," the Medici slogan that no one had dared pronounce publicly for over 3 years. The city was demoralized, hungry, and exhausted. So you can only imagine, and we've talked about how the Republic only really represented about 20 to 25% of the population, and that 70% that was not represented was always such a wild card, so easy to flip from side to side. So if you got a Republic and your life is terrible and you're hearing these stories about the golden age of when the Medici ruled Florence, you'd be running in the streets saying "Palle, Palle" too, especially after a 10-month siege, which I'm sure devastated the entire city. Now, the next thing Professor Cochrane does is he includes a primary source narrative, somebody who was actually at these events, and adds it into his history here. And Varkey states that everybody, men as well as women, adults as well as children, was beside himself with fright and bewilderment. No one any longer knew what to say, what to do, or where to go. Some tried to flee, some tried to hide, some tried to take refuge in the palazzo or in the churches. But most of them simply entrusted themselves to God and patiently awaited, from one hour to the next, not just simply death, but death amidst the most horrible cruelties imaginable. So remember, folks, these people have the memories of Rome 1527. They have an army outside, and inside they have their guys negotiating. And sure enough, the negotiators, they saved the city of Florence. The city of Florence does not get sacked like Rome in 1527, but they essentially also had to sell out the Republic to do so. So this is a big turning point, folks. The siege, the year 1530, because in the year 1531, Alessandro de' Medici is going to come in and he's going to become the first Duke of Florence. Things are really going to start to change here.